How do you become a cosmetic dentist? My name's Dr Amelia Judson, and I'm a cosmetic dentist based in the beautiful Double Bay, Sydney. It's like the Sydney version of Beverly Hills. It's very beautiful. The people are very beautiful. For context, I looked up the median house price, and it is $6.6 million. We are a clinic that delivers a really niche cosmetic and reconstructive surgery. But how did I get here from graduating university 5 years ago to now working as a cosmetic dentist? I feel cosmetic dentistry is one of those ones where it's all sexy and glamorous and everybody wants to do it. The thing with cosmetic dentistry is there's no specific specialty for it. If you're a patient, bear that in mind because no two cosmetic dentists are made the same. And it requires you to be really good across a lot of different areas. So what was my journey? I'm from a tiny country town called Bogan, which is here. Yep, middle of nowhere. My patients always think it's a joke, and I'm like, no, my family's been there for 120 years. So growing up out there, I decided for some reason at the age of 12 that I wanted to be a dentist. I looked into a couple of different avenues when I was in high school. I was thinking about architecture, PR, and dentistry. And I did work experience, but ultimately what it came down to was that I really loved dentistry. I remember one of my good school friends' dad was a dentist, because I don't have any dentists in my family. I was talking to her one day about it, and she said, my dad tells me that every day I go to work, I look forward to going to work. And I thought that was really nice because I think it can be really hard to find that. With that said, dentists are freaks. I ended up applying for scholarships to go to high school in Sydney because the education system in the country in Australia is not great. And I recognized pretty early on to get the marks that I needed, I would need to go elsewhere. So I left home when I was 12. I was really fortunate that I did get a scholarship to go away to an incredible school in Sydney. I didn't love high school, to be honest. It really wasn't my jam. In fact, I think formal education in general, I actually really don't like. I'm quite dyslexic. I can't read that well. For that reason, now that there's so many resources in video form for dentistry, it makes it so much easier to be able to absorb information. I was really fortunate because I was young for my year in high school, which meant I got into dental school first try. I ended up starting when I was 17, which is also wild to think about now because I don't think I would have trusted a 17-year-old touching my mouth. I applied to a university called Charles Sturt University. It had really good opportunity to get country experience and like a real mix of patients. To get into my university, there was only 2 in Australia like this where it was undergrad and you didn't need a UMAT, or I think it's now called a UCAT. It's a really hard exam, and especially when you're trying to study for that final exam to get that entry mark for university, to then juggle the other UCAT thing on the side, I just knew it wasn't going to work. I tried and I did do some paid courses, but it's a really learned way of thinking. It just takes a lot of study. I was focused on studying for everything else. To get into my degree, it required a mark over 90 in the HSC, and it's probably changed because it's been 10 years since I've been at school. You needed to show commitment to the profession, and particularly because it was a country rural university, they wanted to show that you were interested in going back to the country, which has really worked out well because now I work in the centre of Sydney. You just don't know what's going to happen in life. I had every intention to go back to the country when I graduated. As they say, life is what happens when you're busy making plans. Every holidays in high school, I would go and do work experience with different dentists and different specialists. It kind of ended up being like a resume of seeing different areas of dentistry to show that you're committed and you're actually genuinely passionate about it as a profession. Third thing that you needed was an essay. I'm trying to dig it up. I will do a video on my application. I'll actually read it to you if I can find it, and what they look for, because I've been on both sides. I know a lot of academics who are my friends now, and then I also was obviously on the other receiving end interviewing. I think you go in expecting that they want you to say certain thing, but ultimately they just want to see who you really are, as cheesy as that sounds. And the fourth thing you had to do was go through 3 very intense interviews. They were panel interviews, and each room had like a different challenge. It was weird. There was one room where there was this clock that was ticking super loudly. I didn't notice it, but everybody else did because I was so focused on what I was saying. But I guess it was to see if you get annoyed easily or distracted. In one of the rooms, there was like, I was wearing heels because obviously I wanted to put my best foot forward. And it was like a game of Operation with like a light bulb, and you had to trace through the wires without touching the edge, and I was doing it standing up in stilettos. I think one of the most torturous tests that they did was for guys to see whether they were colorblind or not. It is important in dentistry. They would make you line up shade tabs from lightest to darkest. If you're colorblind, that's actually quite hard to do. Thankfully, I made it through and they accepted me. My year of dentistry was quite a mixed bag. I was the youngest. There was a lot of people who were having career changes. Throughout dentistry, I actually worked as a professional DJ. Random. I used to tour around. I played at Fusion Music Festival. I played with Timmy Trumpet, Tiger Lily. At the time, I didn't realize how useful and beneficial that would be later on in my career. DJing was awesome because it meant that I could work Fridays and Saturdays, and I could make more money than I would if I just worked a normal hospitality job, which gave me more time to study. And I really enjoyed it. It was really fun for a while. But it got hard in the final years because I was touring, I was trying to study. When I graduated dental school, I retired from DJing. In my final year, I met someone on Tinder and I decided to move to Melbourne, and I had never been to Melbourne before. Prior to that, I was planning on going out and working in a very small country town called Nyngan, which is also in the middle of nowhere. The idea there was that I would work there for a couple of years and then I would have ended up buying the practice. The thing to note about being a new grad dentist, it's hard. It's tough. It gets easier, I promise. Having moved to a new state, I didn't have any connections and I didn't really know anyone, and that was really stressful. When you're a new grad, people will either take advantage of you or they just don't want to give you the time of day, which I do understand to an extent because a new grad needs a lot of TLC to get them up and running. I worked 7 jobs in the space of 2 months. It was cooked. I think there was one job I worked for 2 weeks. I was watching him design a CEREC. At that stage, I didn't know how to design CEREC, but I was watching and I was like, I don't know a lot about CERECs, but I know that's not how you do it. The contacts were not good. The interproximal area was not good. I knew at that point probably not the right practice for me. I worked at a clinic where all they did was whitening. I did domiciliary dentistry, which is where you go into like schools, old people's homes, prisons. It was very hard on your body. I was sending out, no joke, like 50 resumes a day. I would hear back from like 1 or 2. I ended up working in a country town like 3 hours out of Melbourne, so I would drive of like a Tuesday morning, work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then come back. It was tiring, and I was also the only dentist there, so as a new grad, that's really hard. I ended up landing a interview at a beautiful cosmetic dental clinic in a suburb called Toorak. I didn't end up getting the job, but honestly, I was just so chuffed. And then I got into the interview and this guy was like, I just wanted to see what you were like as a person because you've just done a lot of random things. Okay, thanks. Are you going to give me the job? He didn't give me the job. I ended up doing an interview with a newspaper about working as a rural dentist. Somehow that ended up on the desk of this guy who owned the largest single location dental practice in Australia. He looked me up and he saw all my social media. By that stage, I'd flipped my Instagram page from being a DJ to dentistry, and I was like, I want to educate, and I'd been sitting there for like 2 years, and I just figured I might as well make the use of this following that I've grown. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but could potentially be really beneficial in a professional setting. I get an email from him. I knew who he was because I looked at the practice and just thought, wow, that's such a beautiful space. And then I got this email from the guy who was the boss of that saying, I came across your newspaper article and I had a look into your digital persona. What an amazing journey with all the DJing stuff. I'd love to catch up. I think the subject line for the email was Genie in the Bottle. It ended up being really fruitful, and he offered me a position as a graduate dentist, but then also working in their media team as like a social influencer for them. So I got put through media training and I would work with a PR team every week. I did interviews, which was pretty full on for a new grad. I got to be on the cover of our industry magazine first year out, which was wild. The practice itself was incredible, and I made some great friends there because it's 5 levels, 40 chairs, and we have every single specialty under one roof. It meant that you were referring up and down the ladder a lot. Any questions, they were always there to answer. When I was living there, my Tinder beau left me. It was actually very hard, not gonna lie. I think we'd both gotten to this point where in our respective careers we were super burnt out because I had gone hard the first year I got out of dentistry. I was working 6 days a week in the clinic, PR, marketing, media, and then I would often go to events during the night with Instagram. And then on weekends, I was shooting content and I was just trying to make everything work. And I definitely crashed hard. I ended up going through like this quarter life crisis at the age of 23. It's not about the destination. That will never make you happy. You have to enjoy the journey. I got to the point where I hated dentistry. I was done. I decided that I wanted to move back to Sydney to be closer to my family. It had been an incredible experience being in such a big practice, but I needed to take the next steps. And I also needed some downtime. And that was a really well-timed decision because it was December 2019. And then we all know what happened at the start of 2020. I ended up cutting back a couple of days with dentistry. I was only working like 2.5 days clinically, and I started a digital marketing agency. It was specialized around dentists. Through that, I actually ended up meeting the practice that I work with now. And it turns out that Nicola, the practice manager, had been stalking me since I was in Melbourne, and she saw that I'd moved to Sydney. They were opening this new practice in Double Bay, and so she reached out wanting potential services. She literally just used it as a way to get to know me, and she's very devious like that. They ended up offering me a position to come on as Fadi's associate. So as an associate dentist, you're like an apprentice. So even though you've done your degree, there's so much that you learn. Fadi, for example, he's one of the key opinion leaders for digital dentistry worldwide. He's an incredible surgeon, incredible when it comes to cosmetics. It's a case of day in, day out, I'm just bombarded with so many interesting things. Cosmetic dentistry requires you to be really, really good across surgery, microplastics. You need to understand orthodontics in a really strong way, because I think a lot of patients come to us and they say, oh, I want to get veneers done, my teeth aren't straight. And it's like, you really need them to be in the right position before we start building things on top. When you're trying to camouflage teeth that are malpositioned, a lot of the time you either end up making them too bulky or you have to cut a lot of tooth structure in the process. So I would say 80 to 90% of our cases need at least a little bit of straightening beforehand. Even if they look pretty straight to start off with, there's little things that we do to get them perfect. And you also need to be super across restorative, composite, porcelain. I think as well you have to be very well versed in digital technologies. The practice that I work in, we are a purely digital clinic. I've learned so much about CAD design. I'm actually going to Melbourne tomorrow and I'm learning how to use a software called Co-Diagnostics, which is like a surgical software suite put out by Straumann, which is an implant company, one of the biggest in the world. And it is insane. ExoCAD's really, really cool because it's all about designing veneers and crowns and doing all the prosthetic stuff. Co-Diagnostics is all about the surgical side. So you can do apicectomies, you can do crown lengthening, you can design sinus lift, bone building, all on 4. So I'm learning that, again, cosmetic dentistry is evolving so rapidly that you have to have this real hunger for learning. So this is what this channel for me is going to be all about. Teaching and sharing just all the cool stuff that I'm learning, because I love dentistry. It's sick. Like, it's so cool what we get up to every day. I think there's nothing more fulfilling than when we get to the end of like a reconstructive case where we've taken all the teeth out, put all the implants in, rebuilt everything, and this is over the space of 24 hours. They pick that mirror up and they look at themselves for the first time and the emotion that goes through them. They break down into these tears of happiness. I feel so blessed and privileged to be a part of that. Cosmetic dentistry is a journey and it's always evolving. I'm super excited to share the fundamentals with you guys. I think one of the biggest things that I've learned whilst working to become the kind of dentist that I am now is that in the age of social media, you see all of these cases. If you are somebody who's just graduated from dentistry, you see all your colleagues posting stuff, being like, oh, look at me. I think there's this real push to try and fly before you can even crawl. That doesn't lend itself to the best outcome for patients. You have to nail the fundamentals. So if you want to learn more about them, please feel free to subscribe. Ugh, that sounds so cringy.